If you want to hate America, watch the news. If you want to love America, drive across it. That's what a group of European football fans discovered when they came to the United States for the 2026 World Cup. They arrived expecting crime, collapse, and hostility. They found something else entirely. They expected a nation in decline. They found a country still moving at full speed. They expected cold, rude, aggressive people. They found warmth that made them question everything they'd been told. And by the time they left, many of them were apologizing. For years, European media had painted America as a dangerous, divided, and decaying nation. Shootings, riots, political chaos, social collapse. That was the image. That was the story. And it was a story these fans believed completely. But here's what happens when belief meets reality. Here's what happens when you actually show up. The first surprise came within hours of landing. Not from a skyscraper, not from a stadium, not from anything grand or impressive. It came from a waitress in a diner near the airport who called a grown man sweetheart, as if she'd known him her entire life. The British fans in the group didn't know how to process it. In London, service is efficient, professional, distant. You order, you receive, you leave. The transaction is complete, and no one pretends otherwise. But here, strangers smiled. They asked how your flight was. They asked where you were from. They asked if you needed anything else, and they actually meant it. One fan from Manchester later admitted he'd spent the first day waiting for the catch, waiting for the scam, waiting for someone to ask for a tip before the service even began. It never came. What came instead was something far more disorienting: genuine kindness. Not performed kindness, not transactional kindness, but the kind of warmth that makes you realize you've been living in a culture that forgot how to offer it. And that was just the first hour. The football fans had traveled from England, France, Germany, and Spain. They came with their scarves, their chants, their passion for the beautiful game. They also came with something else: prejudice. They'd absorbed years of news coverage that painted America as a nation on the brink, a country where you couldn't walk down the street without fear, a place where politics had torn society apart, a culture so divided that even basic human decency had supposedly vanished. One German journalist traveling with the group had written 3 articles before he even landed, all of them negative, all of them assuming the worst. He was ready to document the collapse. Instead, he documented his own transformation. By day 3, he'd deleted all 3 drafts. The first match was in a stadium so vast it made European grounds look like village pitches. The fans had seen Wembley, they'd seen the Bernabeu, they'd seen the Allianz Arena, but nothing had prepared them for what American sports infrastructure actually looks like. 80,000 seats, air conditioning that could freeze a desert, screens so massive they could be seen from space, and food options that made their heads spin. I asked for a hot dog, one French fan later admitted on camera. They asked me what I wanted on it. I said mustard. They said only mustard, and looked at me like I had 3 heads. The American next to him had a hot dog loaded with chili, cheese, onions, jalapenos, and something called special sauce. Then he added a side of nachos, then a drink the size of a small child. Then he went back for more. The Frenchman later said he'd never felt so inadequate in his entire life. But it wasn't the food that got to him. It was the atmosphere. In Europe, football matches can be tense, tribalism runs deep, rivalries are bitter. There's an edge to the energy that sometimes turns ugly. In America, the atmosphere was something else entirely. It was celebration. It was community. It was a party. Fans from different countries sat together. They traded scarves. They posed for photos. They cheered each other's goals and laughed at each other's misses. Police officers stood nearby, not as enforcers, but as participants, high-fiving children, dancing with fans, taking selfies with anyone who asked. A Scottish fan later said he'd spent his entire life fearing police at football matches. In Glasgow, they were adversaries. In America, they were part of the celebration. It broke my brain, he admitted. I kept waiting for someone to be aggressive. No one was. Everyone was just happy. That word came up again and again. Happy. It was a word that didn't fit the narrative they'd brought with them. But the stadium was only the beginning. The real shock came when they ventured outside the arena and into the country itself. The highways were the first thing that shattered expectations. In Europe, roads are practical, narrow, winding, designed for a continent that was built centuries before cars existed. In America, highways are statements, bold, straight, unapologetic declarations of space and ambition. 10 lanes, 12 lanes. In Texas, 26 lanes merging into a symphony of controlled chaos that would make a European driver weep with terror and admiration. One English fan rented a pickup truck. He didn't need a pickup truck. He didn't even want a pickup truck. But the rental company had offered an upgrade for almost nothing, and he'd taken it out of sheer curiosity. Within 2 hours, he later said, I understood why Americans love these things. You sit up high, you see everything, you feel like you could drive over a mountain and not notice. The truck was huge, the roads were huge, the sky was huge, everything was huge. And for someone from a country where a large coffee is still barely enough to fill a teacup, the sheer scale of American life was almost too much to process. Then came the retail empires. If the highways had broken their sense of space, Walmart broke their sense of reality. One store, one German fan said, shaking his head. One store had more food options than my entire village. And I'm not even talking about the food. I'm talking about everything else. He was right. Walmart wasn't a shop. It was a small nation masquerading as a shop. Electronics, clothing, gardening supplies, furniture, groceries, a pharmacy, an optician, a photo studio, a tire center. And that was just the entry level. Costco was worse. At Costco, a British fan found a television so large he could have projected a movie onto his apartment building. Next to it, a vat of olive oil, large enough to fill a bathtub. Nearby, an entire aisle dedicated to snacks that came in quantities best measured by weight rather than count. Everything is supersized, he said. Everything. And the prices are, I don't understand how Americans aren't all billionaires. When he saw the price of eggs, he nearly cried. In England, eggs had become a luxury item. Prices had soared. Families were cutting back. Basic groceries were becoming unaffordable. In America, eggs were cheap. So cheap that the fans bought dozens just because they could afford to, because the abundance was almost offensive in its generosity. I'm not going to eat all of these, one Spanish fan said, holding a carton of 30. But I had to buy them. It felt like an act of rebellion. And then there was Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's wasn't a gas station. It was a cathedral of convenience, a temple of American excess, a building so large, so absurd, so impossible that the fans initially thought it was a prank. 100 gas pumps, 1,000 feet of floor space, employees in clean uniforms who greeted you like family, a deli that served sandwiches the size of your forearm, barbecue that made Texans weep with pride, bathrooms so clean you could eat off the floor, though no one wanted to test that claim. One French fan refused to believe it was real. This is not a petrol station, he insisted. This is a theme park. You are telling me people stop here to buy fuel, and they find this? The American with him smiled and ordered brisket. The Frenchman ate it and admitted defeat. Food proved to be the most disorienting revelation of all. The fans had heard the stereotypes. American food was processed, unhealthy, low quality. They'd arrived prepared to mock it. Instead, they found themselves in a culinary wonderland they hadn't expected. Free refills were the first shock. In Europe, you pay for every drop of soda. In America, you pay once and drink until your teeth dissolve. The fans couldn't believe it. They kept asking waitresses to confirm. Yes, free refills. As many as you want. Just ask. That's a government subsidy, One English fan joked. It has to be. No restaurant can afford that much sugar. But the portions were the real revelation. In France, a meal is art. Small, elegant, perfectly composed. In America, a meal is a statement. A declaration that you will not leave hungry, that you will not leave wanting, that you will leave with leftovers sufficient to feed a small army. One fan ordered a steak and nearly fainted when it arrived. That, he said, staring at the plate, is larger than my torso. He ate it anyway. He couldn't stop eating it. It was delicious. Waffle House became a pilgrimage site, not for the architecture, not for the atmosphere, but for the sheer chaos and charm of a place that served waffles at 3 in the morning, with a smile and a side of hash browns scattered, smothered and covered.
What is happening?
One German fan asked as he watched a cook prepare 3 orders simultaneously. Why is this place open? Why is everyone so happy? Why is the waffle the best thing I've ever tasted? He never got an answer. He just ordered another waffle. And another. But the real transformation wasn't about food. It wasn't about highways or stadiums or enormous supermarkets. It was about something deeper. Mindset. The Americans they met didn't seem weighed down by the gloom that had overtaken Europe. They didn't talk about decline or crisis or the end of everything. They talked about the future. They talked about opportunity. They talked about what they were going to build next. I met a 19-year-old, one British fan later said. 19 years old. He runs his own landscaping company. He has a truck. He has a team of workers. He has a business plan. He's going to hire more people next year. And he was so optimistic I felt like I was talking to a completely different species. In Europe, young people talk about housing crises. They talk about stagnant wages. They talk about a future that feels smaller than their parents' past. In America, young people talk about what they're building. It wasn't arrogance, it was energy. It was a refusal to believe that the world was ending. It was American optimism in its purest, most powerful form. One fan captured it perfectly. I arrived thinking Americans were loud and arrogant, he admitted. And they are loud. They are very loud. But it's not arrogance, I don't know the word. It's a belief that things can get better. A belief that you can change your life. And I realize that we in Europe have lost that. We complain about everything. We expect the worst. We've been conditioned to be cynical. And here, people just don't. He paused. I think that's why we hate them. Not because they're arrogant, because they remind us of what we used to be. The final revelation came slowly. The fans started talking to each other, comparing notes, sharing their experiences. And they realized something that changed everything. None of them had seen the collapse. None of them had seen the chaos. None of them had witnessed the death of the American dream. All they'd seen was abundance, hospitality, optimism, scale, community, pride. So where had the nightmare come from? The answer hit them like a freight train. The news. For years, their media had fed them a steady diet of American dysfunction. Crime, riots, political divisions, cultural wars, every tragedy magnified, every success minimized, every positive story buried beneath an avalanche of negativity. They'd been given a curated view of the worst America had to offer, and they'd assumed it was the whole truth. But it wasn't. Reality was different. Reality was brighter. Reality was a country still full of life and energy and possibility. And they had been misled. Not by accident, not by coincidence, but by a media system that had discovered a fundamental truth. Negativity sells. Fear keeps you watching. Outrage keeps you scrolling. And the algorithms that fed you this content didn't care about the truth. They cared about engagement. The fans had been trapped in a system that profited from their misery, and they'd believed it. One of the fans later said something that summed up the entire experience. Media showed me a country I was supposed to fear. 2 weeks in that country showed me a place I wish I'd visited years ago. I owe America an apology, and I owe myself a new way of consuming information. He wasn't alone. Across social media, The fans began posting their experiences: photos of smiling strangers, videos of massive highways, raves about Waffle House, confessions of how wrong they'd been. The transformation was complete. They'd arrived as skeptics. They'd left as believers. And somewhere in between, they'd discovered the difference between what they'd been told and what was true. So here's the question that remains. What do you believe about a place you've never visited? What do you believe about a culture you've only seen through screens and headlines? And how much of that belief was created by people who profit from your fear? The fans who came to America expecting decline found abundance. They came expecting hostility and found hospitality. They came expecting collapse and found a country still striving, still building, still dreaming. And they had to admit that everything they'd believed was wrong. Not because they were stupid, but because they'd been fed a version of reality that was never designed to be accurate. It was designed to keep them watching. The fans returned home with new perspectives and empty wallets. But they returned with something more valuable. A simple truth. What you see on the news is not the world. It's a version of the world designed to sell you something. And if you want to know the truth, you have to go see it for yourself. Ask yourself, have you been a victim of this same media manipulation? And more importantly, what will you do about it? If this story changed how you see the world, hit that like button. Share it with someone who still believes the old narrative. Subscribe for the next truth-decoding documentary, because next time, we're looking at the American customs Europeans mocked until they secretly wished they had them at home. The truth is stranger than the headlines. And it's waiting for you to find it. This documentary presents first-hand experiences and observations from international visitors. Individual experiences may vary, and the content is not intended to minimize legitimate challenges or issues within any society.